Alex Ansary here. It is November 11th, 2018. What I'm going to be doing for you tonight is reading from the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Texts, which was a book published in the late 1950s. This author was involved in the initial discovery, at least when it was put into the museum, when they were able to buy it, possess it from the original person that discovered it. The original person that discovered it was a peasant, and they really didn't know what they had. In fact, they burned some of the books, like making tea, and, in a fast attempt to make some money, it exchanged hands multiple times before it got to safekeeping. So it was discovered in 1945, and some of the stuff's a little complex, but the key is their creation story seems to be a 180 from the Old Testament version. And so I want things to be simple. I want you to know that I'm not a member of any religion, but I've always questioned some of the official stories, whether they be from government or religions. I've always questioned groupthink. And I've always found it fascinating that there's so many people that claim that they're spiritual and are part of the New Age that haven't gone into this, right? And haven't discussed the problem of the Archons in our world, the spiritual interference. And so when we talk about like the false light, that is a Gnostic idea. And I was discussing what could be considered a Gnostic idea before I even knew the word Gnostic. It was actually a young girl, or maybe in her early 30s, youngish. The point is that dropped me a book a long time ago before I even took the book even seriously, but she was someone that watched my show back in the day and thought that I would be enlightened by some of the content within that book. But it was a brief pamphlet. It wasn't until 2012 to where I heard a particular couple of individuals online discuss the Archons and their influence over our world. And there was something about that term that, whether it be my soul memory, or something else within me, that knew that that was a video that I was to click on, and there was what seemed to be a download. Nothing too metaphysical, but something that was confirming certain things, and hearing from another person, them describe what I was describing with their own language. So since that time in 2012, it's now 2018. And I got involved in this stuff in 2005. We're going to start reading in just a moment. But I've come to understand and witness and experience the unseen forces, influence, sabotage, and other things that I'm still experiencing, still coming to understand, but it is not flesh and blood, which we find ourselves entangled with or attacked by, but the principalities of darkness. And so there is a part of me that's always been on this path of sharing this knowledge. And we're going to zone in on a couple of things here, including the creation of the Demiurge. And we're going to be reading from the book, and I'm going to try to keep things simple. This isn't the first recording. The other one went off into different areas, and I want this to be an enlightening experience for you, to where you come across some information that may make you go, that sounds interesting. Because, I've always described Portland, for example, the city which I moved out of, as the city of the fallen goddess. Before I even knew anything about the Gnostic mythos or the Sophic myth, or the idea of, matter falling down, or part of her essence through her creation, the Demiurge, falling down into the material world, and the true intention of the universe to see the material world elevated to something higher than its fallen state. And so there's something about like the city in which I'm from that early on I would view it as like it's a fallen state as opposed to what it could be, what it should be, or the real nature of nature, for example, the environment of that area before mankind, right? And the modern era. And so when we actually look at the mythos of the Sophic myth, we might see elements of our own world and civilization, from the macro to the micro. Those are also Gnostic themes. And so we'll see this echoed in Hollywood in movies that have helped some people wake up to a certain level. The Matrix, The Truman Show, Dark City, and many others. So I would say that this is a time-old tradition for our species to philosophize about the nature of our reality. It also seems to be built in to the human reality for those people to be demonized and persecuted as well. So I'm just going to read a little bit from page 26, then jump forward to page 44. But a drama is now enacted in this supernal and perfect world. The 13th and last of the Aeons, Wisdom, or Sophia, tries to imitate the Profather by giving birth from herself exactly as he did, that is, without a partner. She did not know, indeed, that this privilege of bringing forth alone is reserved for the one unbegotten being, the root of all. Sophia, therefore, produces not another perfect being, but a deformed substance, an abortion, at which she is seized with disgust and remorse. Thereupon the Aeons pray to the Profather on behalf of Sophia, and the supreme power commands intelligence and truth to engender a new pair or couple, that of the Christ and the Holy Spirit, which spirit is feminine. At the same time, he himself emanates a new aeon, which is the cross and the limit. By this cross and this limit, the pleroma is strengthened, and by the same means separated from the imperfect and inferior creation of which Sophia has produced the first element. Okay, so we're going to start there. Now we'll jump over to 44, because I want this to continue to flow. According to these Gnostics, both the soul itself and a certain wisdom had a downward tendency. Either the soul from the first was so inclined, or the wisdom caused that inclination of the soul, or else the soul was identical with the wisdom. The other souls who were partakers in wisdom went down together and clothed themselves with bodies, human bodies, for instance, while she, who was the cause of the descent of souls, did not herself go down, but only shed light in the darkness. From this illumination, an image came to birth in matter. This is how these Gnostics conceived the generation of the lower being, whom they called the Demiurge. They said that once created, he was removed from his mother. Then, in order to heap abuse upon the Demiurge who made them, they pictured the world as proceeding from this Demiurge from reflection to the ultimate degree. So this is at the key of why Gnostics were considered heretics, because they did not go along with the Old Testament description. Their idea of the supreme being was beyond human comprehension. And other spiritual texts of the Eastern world, including Sufism, that go deep into that, discuss the supreme being from a different perspective than what most humans are exposed to. Page 44, going to 124. So we're gonna briefly go over then the creation of these Archons. There's other creation stories. Briefly, we're gonna go over. The book is something that reads like a textbook. A lot of things I can't pronunciate or enunciate correctly or as they should be. There's a lot of deep history here. And then what gets deep is when you're dealing with various archetypes that play a role in this, there's overlay with other traditions and spiritual texts from the ancient world. I'm not an expert, but there is definite overlay. There is certain things that come up with regards to a number of Archons over the planets, like 7, things of that nature. And it really causes one to wonder. There's also a sense also of, neutrality of symbols and numbers, that they're not all inherently evil, like a number, but there are certain things that may have certain types of connotations in some texts. But just like there are certain things that could be used one way or express themselves would be another way to say it. There are certain things that express themselves in the lower world, and then there's a higher version of that expressing itself. And that is a theme that we see in literature like this. So let me read now to you from the Hypostasis of the Archons. Under the subject of the hypostasis of the powers in the spirit of the Father of the truth, the great apostle has told us concerning the powers of darkness, it is not against flesh and blood that you have to wrestle, but against the powers of the cosmos. Now notice how the cosmos are not described as higher as humans, as we humans often describe the cosmos as higher or more evolved. But in this sense, the cosmos is like the fallen world of the Demiurge or the illusion. So the Demiurge, right, believes himself to be the sole God. He believes this lie. Sullen with pride, he says, there is no other God but I. And a voice said, you're mistaken, Samuel, which translates to blind God. That doesn't mean that I'm calling him God. If you feel better that we use the word deity, right? Blind deity, blind spirit, Samuel. From this point, the narrative goes on to tell us about the fabrication by this arrogant God of the material world. A material world. The powers of this lower universe decide to create man. Come, they say, let us make a man. The body of this man is fashioned from earth in the image of a high God, a reflection of whom has just been seen by the Archons in the waters below. So this sounds like cloning. This is inverted world. See how humans are already involved in cloning? What's being described here is the Archons cloning man out of the original. They Xerox the original. They copy that shite. And they make it in their image. So you hear in a lot of the Orthodox, made in God's image. Made in God's image? Or made in something else, modified. So again, there's a theme here of us having the ability to rise up in spirit, but the material world in which our bodies are in, that's a prison. There are certain things and forces of darkness working against us in the material world. And that's not something that Orthodox religions explain very well. There's a reason why a lot of us have turned away from a lot of these religions that have won the wars. These kingdoms that have used particular religions to wage their wars. And sometimes just a trio of religions that seem to have like this period of warring with each other over thousands of years. Gee, is it outside the realm of possibility that something else is steering mankind into these bloody conflicts, these holy wars? Not so holy. If you can imagine the same hand, hidden hand from the unseen realms, turning kingdom against kingdom. Now look at the modern world. We can actually prove that the world orders are tied together in more ways than one on just some basic levels, which raises other questions. Then why would they not be in on it if they were to have a conflict later on? Not to jump topics. But see, when we look at our world today in this world of illusion and inversion, and then we look at other stories and mythos, do you not see parallels with how deception works and how things are inverted and how something that somebody may believe is true is absolutely false and how that could become so normalized, right, to a herd of humans that are under a spell? Certain things aren't going to be explained to you in the Gnostic texts. Some people want that. And they don't want to engage in their own inquisitive nature and creative ideas, solutions, understanding what's also really going on, which is a part of solutions, to really understand the nature of the forces of influence that come against us. Now, there is also another book, Fall of Sophia, next to the Hypostasis of the Archons. Mankind has only had so much time to interpret these things. And there's also been a continuation of orthodox and atheistic nihilistic forces coming against the modern spiritual man or woman. Going into Eve, again, this is a different version on the creation story, but out of Adam's side, they created Eve. Now, we're not talking about the Old Testament version. We're talking about the Gnostic version, which says that the Archons created Eve, you see? Then the first man, from having been only material, becomes ensouled. Eve herself is spiritual, and consequently, it is she who gives life to him. That is why, when he sees Eve beside him, Adam names her Mother of the Living. But the Archons themselves are dazzled at the sight of Eve. They fall in love with her. Come and let us send our seed into her. They pursue her, but she makes fun of their stupidity. But then comes the son of the Demiurge, the serpent, who suggests to the woman that she should taste of the tree of life. Moving forward to another part, and what we're doing, we're reading the author's breakdown of the creation story without reading it verbatim, and that helps it flow better. And there's a lot of things that are difficult to understand. Like when we go to the Gospel of St. Thomas, for example, there are certain things that are discussed there. And the way that things are worded, it said that Jesus talked in parables because it was really so dangerous for him to really come out and just say it as it is. By the way, that sounds a little bit like our world. And how people are feeling like they have to speak in code lest they offend somebody, and someone has a resentment, wants to get back at them because of their gnosis, their truth, their knowledge, their wisdom, their opinion, their free speech. So it goes on, the creator of the space world, displeased with men who have greatly multiplied, orders Noah to build the ark and prepares to unleash the deluge. And this takes place upon a mythic mountain. After this exposition of the earthly genesis, the book recounts the history of Sophia, also called Pistis. Logically, the second part should have been placed at the beginning of the work before what we have just summarized, for it describes the creation of the lower heavens. Sophia, it tells us, desired to produce without a partner a creation modeled after the heavenly pattern. She failed, and there is a veil between the higher realms of light and the inferior aeons, and darkness extends everywhere below that veil. The darkness becomes matter, and it is within matter that Sophia carries on her creative work, which is that of a monstrous being shaped like a lion, male and female at the same time, opening its eyes, again, back to describing the Demiurge, worshipped as an actual god by many religions. That's what this is describing. Opening its eyes and seeing nothing around it but dark matter, this being in its ignorance of the higher world grows proud of its solitude and exclaims, in the words we have already found in the preamble of this writing, I am God, there is no other God but I. Now, there is a video that I had to take down because of copyright concerns, but it's talking about the archetype of Jesus, or the rescuer, the hero in Superman. And I wish I kept that. But you know what comes to mind? Superman 2, and the idea that, it was cast down until something happened that would break that glass, and those entities fell into Earth, and they're walking around going, yeah, well, we're going to declare ourselves God because, well, there ain't nobody here to challenge us. And so there is this kind of almost parallel that we can see there with their manipulation and them wanting to be worshipped as God simply because they had the power. And so sometimes there's things in Hollywood that are fairly subtle that a lot of people won't catch. But the idea of falling down or being cast down into the earth plane is also something that is common. And so I think that there is something within the collective unconscious or consciousness that manifests itself in science fiction and comic books that isn't the result of a conspiracy. In fact, the real conspiracy is a spiritual conspiracy, and it's those fallen forms of consciousness that will demonize truth in fiction that's trying to wake them up. People, artists, thinkers, philosophers. There are people on a witch hunt that are going after the wrong people. That's what goes down in the fallen world, to where the people that are trying to share the truth will find themselves attacked by people that are projecting, calling them the demons, calling them the deceivers. When people are encouraging people to think for themselves and wake up, that's demonized. That's demonized. And it's demonized today as much as it was demonized in the past. There's a lot of people out there into the New Age and law of attraction that have no knowledge of some of these mythos and the knowledge, let alone the Archons, let alone a warning not to be channeling mysterious entities and beings that they know nothing about. They should be seeking to increase their own soul voltage. But I'm here simply to share my truth, that I've always felt that was the truth. Before I stumbled upon books like this and certain talk shows that were discussing these things, I saw early on, I saw back in the 80s through certain experiences, that there were human beings, humans amongst us that were deceived. And at the age of a young child, I remember calling BS on certain belief systems that adults were believing as fact. Certain lies from certain voices in the head, promising them the shift of ages. And I've seen people follow in this hive mind consciousness into my adulthood and various elements of it. So I've reached various conclusions, but those conclusions haven't led me to a place where there is no God and there's nihilism. Oh, there's a supreme being, all right. And I don't think that supreme being is, I do believe it is beyond human comprehension to a certain degree. But I don't think that it's pleased, per se, with the progress of mankind. And it may even be beyond being displeased. But the world that we're in is a world in which we're not victims for being here. There's a purpose to our light, soul, essence, emanations falling into this world, or maybe waking up into this world and attempting to rise above matter and rise above being stuck in this type of a world. And there are other things out there other than this that may have their merit, like the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Maybe there are certain verses that would be good to have when facing judgment. Or maybe those are archonic entities that are trying to trap us within the gates of this world, but maybe the Supreme Being allows them to operate on a certain level in order to force us or help us evolve. No pain, no gain. So we have a certain little bit of challenge and pushback in order to create the circumstances in which we grow as souls and overcome and develop those attributes that are able to easily pass through the gates. Also depicted in a movie, The Never-Ending Story, where he passes through the gates and has to know his own value, but he still has to survive the attacks of the entities. Going now to 154. First of all, the primordial being, although invisible and inconceivable, is described at length. He does not participate in all the aeons. He has no duration. He exists calmly and at rest in the silence. He contemplated his own image in the waves of pure light that surround him. So this is the author going over certain Gnostic texts and trying to interpret the Supreme Being. This entity is the perfect power, thought and image of the Father, who makes himself into primordial being and virginal spirit. Skimming forward. Then is recalled the history of Sophia and of the lower creation of which she had rendered herself guilty. Sophia, contrary to the spirit, wished to create as the primordial Father did, that is, alone and without the collaboration of a partner. She fails and gives birth to a monster like a serpent and a lion in appearance, Ildabaoth, to whom the long version in our collection adds the names of Sakla and of Samuel, ashamed of the abortion she has engendered. Sophia conceals it in a cloud of light so that none of the celestial powers, except the Holy Spirit, also called the mother of the living, Zoe, may see it. And here's where I totally start speculating. Would that be like the heliosphere? Or something even bigger? Because we have a heliosphere, you know, and that kind of protects our, so we're told by scientists, our Earth from cosmic radiation and interstellar shock waves. Cue sound effect. Shock waves. So, with a weakening sun, the heliosphere gets weaker and leaves our solar system vulnerable to what's outside. So, there's also the description of the Archons ruling over the planets of our solar system. Maybe I haven't been into astrology for some specific reasons. The sun, I haven't gone into some really deep stuff with the sun, but always there's a reference to the light. There is a lot of reference to the sun in other ancient spiritual understandings and practices. And there's a lot of animosity, I believe, and I've experienced in my incarnation in this day and age, in attempting to talk about the spiritual side of the sun, the solar cycles, our connection to the sun, and what that tells us about the interconnected nature of all things, how that's a spiritual epiphany to come to, and how it's a very unspiritual epiphany to think that nothing is real whatsoever. The world that we live in, it is an illusion to a certain degree. But there are certain things that do connect us to spirit. And there's a nihilistic philosophy and almost religion that seems to be the undertone of human consciousness in the hive mind. It knows no religion but the religion of nihilism and almost the mocking of the devil or the demons. And it describes demons as working for Archons, and the Archons as working for the Demiurge. So there is a hierarchy. And a lot of people say, no, don't talk about what's higher up on the hierarchy. Talk about these guys down here. No, we're not talking about these guys down here. We're going higher up in the hierarchy as to who's really calling the shots and how things really are manipulated. And ultimately, truth speakers like myself we've sought to understand why in our travels we've come against certain types of interference that's extremely pathological and hateful. And we wonder where it comes from. Is it this? Is it that? Why would it come from different groups at different times? Attempts to marginalize, attempts to demonize. What is the real source of some of the dark synchronicity of human pathology and attacks on those that are just simply trying to help? I'm not a member of any religion. I think that we can go from this and we can look at other things. There are constant references to Zoroaster, the prophet of Zoroastrianism. And a lot of people are allergic to things outside of what they've been spoon-fed their entire life. So there's a little bit greater of an emphasis also in the Egyptian tradition of the sun. Even if there are people that came before us that did some things that are believed to be unconscious, there's also a lot of wisdom that our modern civilization would love to just pretend never even was pinned into paper, was never even discovered, was never even thought of. And be honest about it. This is a nihilistic fallen world civilization that doesn't want us looking about deeper at the nature of the sun. Unless it's, the weather and, crops or no crops, going to the beach or not going to the beach, cold weather or not cold weather, it really doesn't go very far in this fallen world when people think about the sun. But there's something far more deeper, along with the answers to the other questions that are Gnostic in tradition, but I've always asked since day one, before even knowing of the word Gnostic. Who are we? Why are we here? How do we evolve beyond this type of a simulated reality? How do we overcome some of these supernatural, paranormal energies that we share space with because we're in their fallen world? Why are we in their fallen world? How is waking up to the truth about reality as it is in the modern political and geopolitical sphere relevant to this? Now, that's somewhere where I will bring that up. There are other people who talk about modern events. They won't talk about the spiritual reality. There are people who talk about Gnosis or the spiritual reality. They won't talk about modern events. Have you ever noticed that? I know since day one, when I first grabbed a microphone and started Outside the Box TV on cable access, that my job was to help bridge the gap. So this is not a religion that I follow. These are clues that I'm following, and there are other books worthy of investigating those clues. Back in the day, people used to make tons of recommendations for books. Society's changed. That's not to take away from some of your great comments. Get a lot of great emails from Jared and the philosophies that he's coming across and the psychology of humanity that he's learned about and sharing with me. And it's mind-blowing stuff. The rest of society, I don't know whether society is having a collective shift in consciousness for the better or whether it's sleepy time. Starting to appear more like sleepy time than a time of enlightenment or a renaissance. Doesn't feel like a renaissance at this time. People can go ahead and play clips of V for Vendetta all they want with mysterious people wearing masks, storming government buildings, but that really, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting different results. Are the mobs in the streets going to save us? Who's going to save us from the mobs in the streets? So, we end up with this chasing one's tail philosophical question. But as I said years ago with regards to alternative media, even if they could topple the powers that be, in the end, they'll just fight themselves for who will be the one to attempt to pull the sword from the stone or just grab literally the torch of power, the illuminated torch of power. Here we are 10 years after I first had that kind of a hit that all this is kind of fake with just blaming it on Bush and Obama, when if some of these people like Alex Jones actually had power, oh my God, Lord save us. Fast forward 10 years later, look at what's happening today. Look at the inversion of truth. Look at the deception, and what a grand deception. What a grand archonic deception many of these people have brought us in the alternative media. But we can see that as a core example in this fallen world of things that are false appearing real, and the illusions of separation dividing us, and people being encouraged to defile the Creator's children through violence. You see how so many people are lost, not even realizing that what they may be following is more fallen than they can ever imagine. And it occurred to me while journaling earlier that the mass of the human species, it does not seem conscious at all, for the most part, of a consciousness beyond it. It is like it is the consciousness of the Demiurge saying, there is none other but me. There is none other but fellow humans. We know it all. Yet, humans are so fallen and dumb to a certain level. I mean, really dumb, but yet they've been able to figure out cloning. As fallen as this society is, as back-asswards as it seems to be, there's a level of technology that's creating non-gender animals and humans and clones in the laboratory. This is all the hallmarks of the Demiurge. People have speculated for years, that have come from the traditional Christian perspective and a very black and white, whether Lucifer will actually be victorious or whether there will be this. There already is the tampering because this is already the fallen world. Matter has already been defiled. It's taking place here. The question is not, in our lifetimes, is the whole world going to shift? The question is there information that we could use in this lifetime that can help us evolve beyond this type of a world? And if we look at the spiritual and religious traditions, especially of the East, these reoccurring questions keep coming up and up and up. And I think there's more to know here. Okay, so let's see what we have here. We have 157. And then it gets into Adam a little bit more. The Archons take Adam away and place him far below in paradise, the delights of which are bitter and illusionary. The tree of life is, in its every detail, made of perversity. Soon to be associated with it is the counterfeit spirit designed by the Archons to counteract the spirit descending from on high. And it continues. But I'm going to bring this to a pause. I am going to say this about relationships. And this is something that has to come up, right? There is a reason why humans that are waking up today may not be bedding down with average humans that are of a low consciousness, because they don't want to defile and corrupt their own energy and their own consciousness. There's one thing for there to be a sexual union, and then there's lust, and there's ways in which this world encourages lust over the sacred union. And so these are concepts I came to after in the book, but initially in my own dating experiences, it's that story. It's a Gnostic story. It's a Gnostic story or a spiritual story of waking up within a world going, I don't want to be that type of man that this world's telling me to be. I want something more out of the people that I connect with. And if not, bedding down with people that will sap our energy, and there may be a deeper supernatural reason why some people are drawn into our lives to either create a heartbreak or, on a deeper level, get a lock-in on our energy if they're really working for spiritual parasites, whether you choose to call them demons, archons, or something else. I want to help you understand some of these concepts, and I want to learn myself. And I think a lot of the words and the names of these deities get in the way. Ultimately, I am an advocate of prayer, and we may have spiritual guardians, but I don't particularly pray to deities. And I think that becoming aware that there is this type of cosmology is not an endorsement in a belief of particular deities being gods, but in fact is taking a deeper look at this knowledge that was left behind. And if we look at our world and we do the overlay over it, I think that there's some pretty solid connections. I'm going to leave you now with some quotes. Some would say alleged quotes, but this is the Gospel of St. Thomas, and this was what was removed from the New Testament. I've also heard on a lecture on Gnostic thought that the book of Revelations is very Gnostic leaning in its nature, and that it seemed to be intended that way, but it was interpreted by the Orthodox folks as something literal, so it was left in there, and perhaps even some of these Gnostic scriptures may have been tampered with, just like some biblical scriptures. So this is not to be looked at, these things that we're reading, as things to worship, but clues among other clues. And that would be, by the way, the other stories of Jesus that may have traveled to India, Nepal, and Tibet. That is the Buddhist story of Saint Issa, Issa. And so there is another story that is completely parallel to the story of Jesus that we know, but it comes from the East. And there's not a lot of people that know this, right? Some people can go in a zeitgeist direction and say, oh, so it's a repeating story similar, so it must all be false. That's where zeitgeist took it. And other people that perhaps were looking for someone to place the argument or make the argument for them that made sense. And I never got on board that bandwagon. Just because there's deception and maybe misinterpretation by the rulers of our day and age, our church, our modern Rome, on what the Bible's all about and what other things are all about, it doesn't mean that there isn't a deeper story, right? And just like we've seen more or less one particular version of Islam, it doesn't mean that in the Middle East there aren't other spiritual traditions that are forgotten, buried, or bombed back to a state to where they are not recognizable. Also remember that because of modern day digging methods, because it's no longer by hand, they aren't making the same type of discoveries anymore. Archaeological digging and things of that nature, modern construction methods are done with big time machines. They're not done by hand anymore. So there isn't the same type of discovery of some of these ancient texts. And I said before, there could have been an agenda years ago to put out false information in books and in the conspiracy movement. We're talking about way back to the 80s and 90s that would be religiously oriented to the point where they put in stuff years ago saying that spiritual texts one day would be discovered that would challenge the orthodox worldview. It seems like there was a little bit of predictive programming put in the truth movement years ago that was poo-pooing the idea of opening up one's mind to the greater reality as it is and how the ancients recorded it. There's been a lot of attempts within the so-called truth movement and key speakers and peoples in religion and also the media religion or the religion of big media to steer people away from the truth and into the false light, the false information, and the false news, while people masquerade as followers of Christ, while deceiving people and claiming that they have good intentions. And so let's go ahead and just find a few things to read, and then we will wrap things up here. He who drinks from my mouth will become like me, and as for me, I will become what he is, and what is hidden will be revealed to him. On what day will the kingdom come? The disciples of Jesus ask him. It will not come when it is expected. No one will say, see, it is here, or look, it is there, but the kingdom of the Father is spread over the earth, and men do not see it. He who has known the world has fallen into the body, and he who has fallen into the body, the world is not worthy of him. When I tell my mysteries to mystery, your right hand does, let your left hand not know that it does. That it does it. And there's some missing words that it's indicating here in verse 66. Verse 67, Jesus says, there was a rich man who had many possessions. He said to himself, I will use my wealth to sow my field, to plant, to fill my barn with harvest, so that the need will not touch me. Such were the things that he thought in his heart, but during that night he died. He who has the ears to hear, let him hear. So we're just going to stop it there. There's another video where I do a full reading of the Gospel of St. Thomas. It is on this YouTube channel. And so I'm looking for clues. And if I start looking at other spiritual texts in the future, if you would like to recommend that I look at a particular something, I think there's a lot of us trying to wake up into the type of world that we're in. I think you need to be very careful about taking advice from certain people. There could be people that say, don't go to the light when you pass. How do we know that? Have we really done the work to maybe investigate some of the different theories that are out there? So think for yourself. And I'm certainly not telling you what to think, but I certainly think that there is more to know about reality and why we're here, how we're tested, how in this fallen world, there are some things that could be perceived to be spiritual that are not. And there could be other things that don't seem to have merit in our life or value. There may be things that you don't see value in or don't understand. It doesn't mean that there isn't a spiritual lesson in that. It doesn't mean that that person doesn't have truth. All of us have some sort of truth. And it needs to refine itself. So there's a deeper purpose, ladies and gentlemen, to being on live, to being online, to being alive, to being in the world as it is today. If you appreciate videos like this, feel free to let me know. There's more that I'd like to get into. It's difficult reading some of this information and knowing that some of it is a little bit confusing, some of it is a little bit hard to pronunciate, and a lot of it goes against other people's belief systems. And let's be frank, back in the day, anyone talking like me would be straight up murdered. It just wasn't allowed. And certainly in other countries in the world, it's not allowed to think outside the box. It's interesting how a lot of people are critical of Muslims, but some people don't want to be allowing themselves of others when they share their views spiritually. You know, there's a lot of oppression in the society of men and women. in which we don't have to look beyond our own continent to see the oppression. So I want to thank you for watching. Please make a donation if you can't afford to. And if you like videos like this, I'm going to be with you over the course of the winter. Check out the links down below. And I'm Alex Ansary signing off.